I've never been a superstitious man. Ghosts, spirits, curses, all of it felt like nonsense. My wife Sarah was the opposite. She loved all that mystical, spiritual stuff. She'd go on and on about how some places had energies or how she could feel something otherworldly when we'd visit a new place. I used to tease her for it. I didn't mean anything by it, I just never took it seriously. Now I wish I had. It's been almost a year since Sarah died. I still don't know how to talk about it. I don't talk about it really. I just packed up the RV one day and decided to drive to get away from everything. Her voice, her smile, the way she used to look at me when I'd roll my eyes at her hippie nonsense. It was all too much to deal with, so I left. I wasn't running from her memory exactly. More like I was trying to outrun the guilt that came with it. Sarah always wanted to visit the desert, especially the Navajo Nation. She said Monument Valley was one of the most spiritual places in the world. I never took her. Work got in the way, or my cynicism did. Either way, it never happened. And now, with nothing but miles of empty road ahead of me, I found myself driving right into that part of the world. Maybe it was my way of making up for it. The landscape around me was beautiful in an eerie, desolate way. Massive red rocks rising out of the desert, mesas silhouetted against the setting sun. The kind of place that made you feel small, insignificant. I parked the RV in a remote spot off an unmarked dirt road. No other campers around, just the endless stretch of desert and the towering rock formations in the distance. It was quiet, peaceful even. I thought maybe I'd finally get a decent night's sleep. I stepped out and walked a bit around the RV, taking in the silence. The air was cool, the sky already darkening with the stars beginning to shimmer into view. Sarah would have loved it. As I sat by the small campfire I'd built, poking at the flames, I thought I heard something in the distance. A howl, maybe. Coyotes. I figured it was nothing unusual in a place like this, but the sound was strange. More like a scream than an animal call. I shrugged it off, telling myself it was just the wind. Still, it gnawed at me. Something about the isolation felt different tonight. Heavier. I tried to shake the feeling and headed back into the RV. I locked the door out of habit, but deep down I knew a lock wouldn't help me feel safe. Not tonight. The first sign that something wasn't right came early the next morning. I'd been outside sipping my coffee and watching the sun rise over the desert when I noticed the tracks. Big, too big to be a coyote. Canine-like, sure, but the prints were deeper, more defined, and there were too many of them. They were circling the RV in a wide arc. I crouched down to get a closer look. The spacing was wrong, like whatever had made them had a stride far longer than any normal animal. I shook my head. Probably a wolf, I reasoned, even though they weren't supposed to roam this part of the desert. Or maybe a large dog from a nearby ranch. Either way, I wasn't about to get spooked over some tracks. I spent the day hiking, taking in the massive rock formations and the endless red sands. The wind carried whispers through the valleys, but I ignored it. I refused to let my mind play tricks on me. This was supposed to be my reset, my chance to process everything and finally move on. But that night, as the firelight flickered in front of me, I couldn't ignore the feeling that I wasn't alone. The coyotes started up again. At least I assumed they were coyotes, but the howls were different this time. Longer, more drawn out, closer. I told myself it was nothing. Tried to focus on the crackling fire, but the unease crept in anyway. Then I saw it. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed movement on the ridge not far from the RV. A figure, tall, humanoid, but wrong somehow. It moved with a jerky, unnatural gait, like it didn't quite know how to walk. I blinked, and it was gone, swallowed by the shadows. My heart raced. I stood, trying to peer into the darkness, but there was nothing out there, just empty desert. The howls stopped, replaced by an eerie, oppressive silence. I doused the fire quickly and retreated into the RV, locking the door behind me. I laughed at myself, a grown man terrified by shadows in the night. I was just exhausted, that was all. Grief and exhaustion made you see things that weren't there. I repeated that to myself as I crawled into bed, but I couldn't shake the sense that something was watching me. The next morning, I found more tracks. This time, they weren't just around the RV. They led right up to the windows, pressed deep into the sand, circling the vehicle like a predator stalking its prey. I stared at them, unease curdling in my stomach. These prints were bigger than the ones from yesterday, deeper too. Something was out here, something that was getting bolder. I decided to leave. That morning, I packed up my things, double-checked the tires on the RV, and set the GPS for the nearest town. But as soon as I hit the ignition, the engine sputtered. It wouldn't start. "Come on, not now," I muttered, trying again. Nothing. I went outside to check the engine, hoping it was something simple, but when I popped the hood, everything looked fine. There was no reason for the RV to stall like this. Yet there I was, stuck in the middle of nowhere, with no cell signal and no way to leave. As the day wore on, that strange feeling of being watched never left. I kept glancing over my shoulder, certain I'd catch sight of that figure again, but the desert was still dead quiet. That night, it came closer. I heard it long before I saw it. Footsteps outside the RV, soft at first, but growing heavier, more deliberate. Something was walking around, pacing as if deciding what to do next. I stayed perfectly still inside, listening as the footsteps circled the RV, stopping near the windows. Then came the scratching. At first, I thought it was a branch scraping against the side of the RV, but the sound was too methodical. It came in short bursts, like claws dragging across metal, testing the strength of the walls. I grabbed the flashlight and crept to the window, slowly pulling back the curtain just an inch. My breath caught in my throat. There, outside in the dark, was the figure I had seen on the ridge. But it was clearer now, standing in the moonlight just feet from the RV. It wasn't human, at least not anymore. It looked like a man, but its limbs were wrong, too long, too thin. Its skin was stretched tight over its bones, and its face, it was shifting, contorting, flickering between the face of a man and that of a coyote. It stopped scratching and turned toward the window, as if it could sense me watching. Its eyes, yellow and gleaming, locked onto mine for a moment. Time seemed to freeze. Then it bared its teeth in a sickening grin. I staggered back, heart pounding in my chest, and stumbled toward the door. I had to get out, had to run. But as soon as my hand reached for the latch, I heard it. "Mark." I froze. "Mark, it's me." The voice, it was Sarah's. Soft, familiar, and filled with the love I hadn't heard in almost a year. I turned slowly, staring at the window. The figure outside had disappeared, but the voice lingered, echoing in the night. "Mark, come outside, please." I shook my head, tears burning in my eyes. No, it couldn't be. It was impossible. Sarah was gone. She was gone. But the voice, it sounded so real. I pressed my hands to my ears, squeezing my eyes shut. "No," I whispered. "No, no, no." The voice grew louder, more insistent. "Mark, come to me." I fell to my knees, clutching my head as the scratching returned. More violent this time, as if the creature was trying to claw its way inside. But I didn't open the door. I didn't go outside. The next morning, everything was quiet. No scratches, no footsteps, no voice. I stepped outside and the desert was calm again, the tracks erased by the wind. The RV started without a hitch. I drove away from Monument Valley, leaving the cursed land behind. But the memory of that night, the voice of my wife, the creature in the dark, has followed me ever since. Some things can't be explained. Some things I realize now should never be disturbed. There's a kind of silence that creeps up on you when you're driving long stretches of road at night. The engine hums, the tires hiss against the pavement, and everything else just falls away into the dark. I used to like that silence, back when the road was a refuge, a way to keep the past buried. Now, though, that silence had taken on a different weight. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting out there in the fog. My name's Jack Evans, slick to those who know me well, and I've been hauling loads across this country for over 15 years. Before that, I worked as a commercial diver, recovering lost cargo off the coast. But the sea and I had fallen out. I thought getting into trucking would keep me far away from the water. Funny how life has a way of dragging you back to the places you least want to go. Tonight, I was hauling a sealed container bound for a shipyard near Bar Harbor, Maine. Simple job, no questions asked, just get it there. The kind of job I used to take without a second thought. But the client's vagueness about the cargo and the extra cash to stay quiet left a sour taste in my mouth. Still, money's money, and I wasn't one to dig too deep. The fog rolled in thick as I drove north along Route 1, the coastal highway running parallel to the sea. I knew this stretch of road well enough to navigate it blind, but tonight the fog seemed thicker, heavier. The GPS had started acting up about an hour ago, rerouting me onto older, narrower roads. I assumed it was just a glitch. Old systems didn't handle the coastal areas too well, but now my gut was telling me something else. As I passed another turnoff toward the cliffs, the GPS blipped again, rerouting me to an unnamed road that curved down toward the coast. My knuckles whitened around the wheel as I considered pulling over to reset the system. Something was wrong. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled, the kind of feeling you get right before a storm hits. Just then, the CB radio crackled to life. Jack. The voice was faint, distorted, as if it was coming from underwater. My stomach tightened. No one was supposed to be on this frequency. Hell, I hadn't talked to anyone in hours. Jack, help me. I snatched the mic off the dash and keyed it up, trying to keep my voice steady. Who is this? No answer. Just static. I stared at the radio, willing it to stay quiet, but the voice came through again. This time clearer, like the static was peeling away. Jack, why didn't you come back? I slammed the mic down and tried to focus on the road, but the memory of that voice hit me hard. It couldn't be. It was impossible. But it sounded just like Dave, my old diving partner, the guy who drowned 6 years ago in that accident. The accident I'd been running from ever since. Get a grip, Slick, I muttered, rubbing a hand across my face. The long hours on the road, the fog, it was all getting to me. That's what it had to be. Just the past sneaking up, trying to claw its way back into my head. But the voice, it was so real. I pushed the pedal down, speeding up as the road twisted and dipped closer to the coastline. The fog was thicker here, swirling in dense, wet waves, and the smell of salt water filled the air. The engine sputtered just for a second before roaring back to life. Another bad sign. And then I saw them. Lights blinking faintly just off the edge of the road where the cliffs dropped down to the sea. At first, I thought it was a boat. Fishing trawlers sometimes got too close to shore in the fog. But these lights weren't moving. They hovered low and pale, just out of reach, dancing through the mist like they were waiting for me. I slowed the truck, squinting through the windshield, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The lights pulsed rhythmically, almost in time with the steady hum I'd been hearing in the cab for the last few miles. That hum, low, eerie, was coming from the trailer. I'd noticed it earlier, but now it felt more like a heartbeat. A slow, rhythmic thump vibrating through the entire rig. I gritted my teeth and pressed on, ignoring the cold knot forming in my gut. Whatever was in that container, it was none of my business. I just had to deliver it and be done with it. But the lights, the fog, the voice on the radio, it all felt like the past was creeping up behind me, wrapping its icy fingers around my throat. Jack! The voice hit me again, this time loud and clear, like Dave was sitting in the passenger seat. I nearly swerved off the road, my heart pounding in my chest. Stop it, I growled, slamming my hand against the dash. You're not real. But the voice didn't stop. It crackled through the sea, an echo of the past I'd spent years trying to forget. You left me down there, Jack. You left me to drown. The memories hit hard and fast. The dive, the tangled wreck, the moment I lost sight of Dave in the murky depths. I tried to save him, but the currents were too strong. His voice had faded, swallowed by the sea, and now here it was, back to haunt me. The road narrowed and the fog pressed in closer, suffocating. My truck's engine sputtered again, the headlights flickering. I pulled over, heart racing. The hum from the trailer grew louder, more insistent. Whatever was in that container, it wasn't just cargo. It was something alive, something old. I stepped out of the cab, the cold air biting at my skin as I walked around to the back of the truck. The fog clung to everything, thick and wet, muffling the world in a heavy silence. The lights over the water had disappeared, but I could still feel them watching me. The hum was louder here, vibrating through the trailer walls. I reached for the lock, my hand trembling. Part of me knew I shouldn't open it. The other part, the part that was tired of running, needed to know what I was hauling. As I unlocked the container, a voice whispered in my ear, "Come back, Jack." The doors swung open with a metallic creak, and inside, bathed in a faint, otherworldly glow, was an object, an artifact. It looked ancient, carved from dark stone, with strange symbols etched into its surface. The hum was coming from it, pulsating like a heartbeat, sending ripples of energy through the air. I took a step back, the realization sinking in like a weight in my chest. This thing wasn't just cargo. It was something tied to the sea, something old and powerful, and it had been calling to me all night. The fog swirled around me, thickening, and I felt a presence, multiple presences moving through it. Figures, humanoid but distorted, like they were submerged in water, appeared at the edges of the road. Their eyes glowed faintly, and their movements were slow, deliberate, as they waded through the fog toward me. I stumbled back, my pulse racing. The figures grew closer, their shapes becoming clearer. Fishermen, divers, sailors, all of them dripping with seawater, their faces pale and bloated, and among them I saw Dave. His eyes locked on mine, his expression blank, his hand outstretched. "You left me." His voice echoed in my head. "You left me to die." I backed away, but the sea's pull was too strong. The hum from the artifact grew louder, and the figures closed in, their voices mingling with the wind, calling me back to the water. Back to the depths where I'd lost Dave. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my breath fogging in the cold air. I tried to save you." Dave's expression didn't change, but his hand dropped. The figures stopped, hovering at the edge of the road. The hum from the artifact slowed, the vibrations easing. The fog, heavy and thick, began to lift, and then, just as quickly as they had appeared, the figures dissolved into the mist, leaving me alone on the road. I closed the trailer doors, locking the artifact inside, and climbed back into the cab. The engine sputtered to life, and I pulled away from the coast, leaving the fog and the ghosts behind. The road stretched out ahead, empty and quiet, but the weight in my chest remained. The sea wasn't done with me. Not yet, and neither was Dave. That night, as I drove into the sunrise, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd only just scratched the surface of something far deeper, something I couldn't escape. The road may have saved me this time, but the echoes from the deep were still calling. I never wanted to take the job, not this one. But when the bills pile up and your savings start running dry, you do what you have to, even if it means going back to the place you swore you'd never see again. Dead Man's Pass. It was Eddie's death that did it. 15 years ago, I lost my brother on that road. His rig skidded off a curve and plunged into the canyon. I was driving a mile behind him when it happened. Saw the whole thing through my windshield like a damn nightmare unfolding in slow motion. I've never been the same since. I never could forgive myself for not doing more, not being there to help. That's how it goes in this life. You haul, you drive, you move forward, keep the past in the rear view. But it's never that simple, is it? I'm Hank Collins, but most people on the road know me as Rusty. Maybe it's the hair going grey, or maybe it's just the wear and tear of 30 years behind the wheel. I've spent most of my life running rigs, hauling everything from livestock to construction equipment. This time, I was hauling heavy machinery for a mining outfit in Utah. Easy enough, or so I thought. The cargo didn't bother me. What bothered me was the route. Route 163, through the heart of Monument Valley, and then up through Dead Man's Pass, the very stretch of road where Eddie lost his life. I've avoided it for years, but I couldn't avoid it this time. The money was too good, and the job came at a time when I needed it most. The first sign that something wasn't right came when I crossed into the desert. The vast expanse of red rocks stretched out for miles, the sun beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the road. It should have been peaceful, almost beautiful, but there was something off. The radio cut out first, static, then silence. Not unusual out here, but it didn't sit right. The stillness felt heavy, oppressive, like the desert itself was holding its breath. As the sun slipped away completely, I noticed a pair of headlights in my rearview mirror. At first, I didn't think much of it. Probably another trucker making the same route. But as the miles passed, those headlights didn't get closer. They stayed there, far back but steady, like whoever it was didn't intend to pass or fall behind, just keeping pace. I tried to shake it off, focusing on the road ahead. The canyon walls began to rise on either side of me, the road narrowing as I approached Dead Man's Pass. My hands tightened on the wheel, the familiar knot of tension growing in my chest. The road was winding, dangerous, with steep cliffs on one side and jagged rock on the other. I'd driven it 100 times before, but not since the night Eddie died. As I climbed higher, the truck started to act up. First, it was the brakes. They began to make a grinding noise that sent vibrations up through the cab. They were new, serviced just a week ago. No reason they should be failing. Then the engine sputtered, just once, but enough to make my heart jump. "Come on, Rusty," I muttered to myself. "Just keep moving, 1 mile at a time." But the truck didn't listen. The headlights behind me were still there, never getting any closer, never fading away. Something about it gnawed at me, a slow realization creeping in. I knew that truck. It was Eddie's. It couldn't be. Of course, Eddie's truck was a wreck at the bottom of the canyon, rusted and forgotten. But the make, the model, even the busted left headlight, it was all the same, and it was following me. I turned up the CB, hoping for some noise to drown out my thoughts, but all I got was static. My hands were sweating now, the wheels slick beneath my fingers. The canyon walls seemed to press in tighter as I reached the most dangerous curve, the very spot where Eddie went over the edge. My foot eased off the gas, but then the CB crackled to life, and a voice broke through the static. "Rusty, Hank, you got to stop." I nearly jerked the wheel in shock. I knew that voice. It was impossible, but I knew it. It was Eddie. "Eddie," I whispered, even though I knew there was no way it could be real. I fumbled with the radio, trying to clear the signal, but the voice only grew louder, swallowed by the hiss of static. "Rusty, you got to stop. You can't make the same mistake." I was losing my mind. That's what this was. Too many years on the road, too many ghosts haunting me. That's all it was. But then the truck sputtered again. The grinding in the brakes got worse. I could feel the whole rig shudder as I tried to slow down, but the brakes weren't responding. I pumped them hard, but nothing. The curve was coming up fast, and I knew I wouldn't make it if the brakes didn't hold. I shouted, yanking the wheel hard to the right, pulling off onto the narrow shoulder. The truck screeched to a stop, just inches from the cliff's edge. For a long time I sat there, heart pounding, staring at the drop below. The canyon stretched out beneath me, a black abyss swallowing the last traces of daylight. My breathing was ragged, my hands shaking, and then I saw it. Eddie's truck was still there, sitting on the road behind me, headlights glowing dimly through the dust. But now, I could see it wasn't just a truck. The rig was mangled, twisted, just like it had been after the accident. The front end was smashed in, the cab crumpled, the windshield shattered, and standing next to it was Eddie. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, but he didn't disappear. He was there, as clear as day. His face was pale, gaunt, eyes hollow, but it was him. He was looking right at me. I stumbled out of the cab, my legs shaking beneath me. I didn't know what I was doing, didn't know what I expected to happen, but I had to get closer. I had to see Eddie. My voice cracked as I took a step toward him. How? How are you? He didn't speak, just stared at me with those hollow eyes. Then slowly he raised a hand, pointing down the canyon. I followed his gaze, my heart pounding in my chest. That's when I saw it. The wreckage of his truck lying at the bottom of the canyon, just as it had been all those years ago. No, I whispered. This can't be real. Eddie's voice echoed in my mind, though his lips didn't move. You gotta stop, Rusty. You gotta stop running. I fell to my knees, the weight of everything crashing down on me. I had run from this for so long, buried it deep, but now there was no escaping it. Eddie wasn't here for revenge. He wasn't here to haunt me. He was here because I'd never let him go. I'm sorry, I choked out, tears burning my eyes. I'm sorry, Eddie. It was my fault. I should have listened. I should have stopped. The wind howled through the canyon, and for a moment it sounded like Eddie was speaking again, but this time it wasn't a warning. It was forgiveness. I never blamed you, Rusty, his voice whispered, softer now, like it was being carried away by the wind. But you got to forgive yourself. The headlights of Eddie's truck flickered once, then went out. The figure standing beside it began to fade, dissolving into the dust and shadows of the canyon. And then he was gone. I sat there on the edge of the road, staring down into the canyon where my brother's truck had fallen. The air was still, the only sound, the soft hum of the desert wind. I didn't know how long I sat there, but when I finally got to my feet, something had shifted inside me. The guilt was still there, but it wasn't crushing me anymore. It wasn't tearing me apart from the inside. I could breathe again. I climbed back into the cab and started the engine. The truck roared to life, and the brakes responded this time, smooth and steady as I pulled back onto the road. I glanced in the rearview mirror one last time. There was nothing there. No truck, no headlights, just empty miles of desert behind me. I smiled a sad, tired smile. It was time to stop running, time to go home. As I drove through Dead Man's Pass, the echoes of the past faded into the night, leaving only the road ahead. I had been driving for hours, the Mojave Desert stretching endlessly around me, barren and vast under the relentless sun. The road was long behind me now, just an empty trail of dust leading out to nowhere. Perfect. This was exactly what I needed, a break from work, from the grind, from people. Out here there was nothing but silence and space. No cell towers, no deadlines, no distractions. Just me in the desert. I pulled the RV to a stop near a rocky outcrop and stepped out. The air was dry and still, the kind of quiet that felt like it was pressing down on you. I took a deep breath, inhaling the warm scent of sand and stone. This was my escape. No buzzing phone, no frantic emails, just the open sky and the endless horizon. I set up camp quickly, parking the RV in the shade of the rock formation and pulling out my gear. I wanted to explore before the light faded. There was something about the desert that always fascinated me, the way the landscape shifted from harsh to beautiful in a matter of hours. But right now, I was focused on one thing: silence. After weeks of being glued to my phone and running from meeting to meeting, the thought of being completely disconnected was a relief. No cell reception out here, no GPS signal, just me and the land. As I unpacked, I heard it, a faint sound, almost too soft to notice, a rhythmic beeping. At first, I thought it was something inside the RV, maybe an alarm or a piece of equipment malfunctioning. But after a quick check of my gear, everything seemed fine. The sound persisted though, steady and faint, like a pulse just beneath the surface. I stepped outside, trying to pinpoint where it was coming from, but the desert was quiet. The only sound was the faint wind rustling through the rocks. I brushed it off, assuming it was some distant echo of the RV's systems, and finished setting up camp. As the sun began to sink below the horizon, I felt that familiar sense of calm wash over me. This was why I came here, to escape, to let my mind breathe. But that night, the beeping came back. I was sitting by the campfire, watching the flames flicker against the darkening sky, when the sound returned, clearer this time. It was still faint but persistent, a soft, rhythmic pulse, like something distant calling out. I stood, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling creeping up my spine. I wasn't the type to get spooked easily. Logic and reason were my tools, and they had served me well in the world of engineering. But there was something about the sound, something that felt wrong. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped away from the fire into the darkness. The desert stretched out before me, vast and empty. I started walking, following the faint sound. The rhythmic pulse grew louder as I moved away from the RV. For a while I saw nothing but sand and rock. The beeping seemed to fade, then grow louder again, like it was moving with me, always just out of reach. I kept walking, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the night. But every time I thought I was getting closer, the sound slipped away. Finally, I stopped. My pulse was racing now, my breath coming in short, sharp bursts. The beeping had faded again, leaving me standing alone in the middle of the desert. The silence around me was heavy, almost suffocating. I turned back toward the RV. The fire still glowed faintly in the distance as I walked. The beeping returned, faint but steady, like a distant heartbeat. The next morning, the sound was gone. The desert was still quiet, as if nothing had happened. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Isolation could do that. The vast emptiness of the desert, the absence of any familiar sounds, it could mess with your head. I decided to hike further out, hoping to clear my mind. The landscape stretched endlessly in every direction, the sun already beating down on the sand. I grabbed my gear, making sure I had plenty of water, and started walking toward a rocky ridge I had spotted in the distance. Halfway there, I saw him, a man walking toward me from the opposite direction, his figure small against the endless desert. I hadn't expected to see anyone out here. This was a remote area, far off the beaten path. As the figure grew closer, I could make out an older man, his clothes worn and dusty, his face lined and weathered from the sun. "Hey!" I called out, raising a hand as we approached each other. The man nodded, his eyes distant, almost vacant. "You camping out here alone?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Yeah, just me," I said, a little taken aback by his bluntness. "I've been walking for days," he said, his eyes scanning the horizon. "You heard it yet? The signal?" I blinked, unsure if I had heard him right. "The signal?" He nodded, his expression grim. "You'll hear it. Once you hear it, you can't get it out of your head. I've been following it for days. It doesn't stop." A chill ran down my spine. "What are you talking about?" The man glanced around nervously, as if the desert itself was listening. "There's something out here, something that's been broadcasting for years. It gets inside your head. Starts with the beeping, then it gets louder. You'll see." I stared at him, unsure of what to say. He looked dehydrated, sunburned, like he'd been wandering the desert for days without rest. I offered him some water, but he shook his head and started walking again, heading back the way he came without another word. I stood there, watching him disappear into the distance, his words echoing in my mind. "Once you hear it, it doesn't stop." That night, the beeping was louder. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The sound pulsed through the silence, steady and rhythmic, like it was coming from somewhere deep beneath the earth. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, the sound was there, burrowing into my mind. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my gear, flashlight, GPS, water, and set out into the desert. I had to find the source. I had to know what was causing the sound. The desert was pitch black, the sky filled with stars. My flashlight cut through the darkness, the beam dancing across the rocks and sand as I followed the beeping. It was louder now, almost frantic, like it was pulling me toward something. The GPS was acting strange, flickering in and out, as if the signal was being disrupted. But I kept moving, my footsteps crunching in the sand. The beeping grew louder with every step. After what felt like hours, I saw it, a structure half buried in the sand. A bunker or a weather station, long abandoned. The beeping was deafening now, emanating from somewhere inside. I hesitated, standing at the entrance of the bunker. The door was ajar, rusted and creaking in the wind. Everything in me screamed to turn back, to leave and forget about the sound. But I couldn't. The signal was pulling me in. I stepped inside. The air in the bunker was stale, suffocating. My flashlight flickered as I moved through the narrow corridor, the walls lined with rusted equipment and old, faded maps. The beeping was louder now, echoing through the metal walls, vibrating in my chest. At the end of the corridor, I found a small room. In the center, there was an old radio tower, its equipment still faintly powered by some unknown source. But that wasn't what caught my attention. On the walls were symbols, strange, intricate markings that looked like they had been carved into the metal. They spiraled outward, converging on the radio tower as if they were feeding into it. In the corner of the room, I found a journal. Its pages were yellowed and brittle. The entries were short, scrawled in frantic handwriting. They talked about the signal, how it started with the beeping, how it got louder, how it never stopped. "It gets inside your head," one entry read. "It's not just a sound, it's alive." As I read, the beeping shifted, turning into a high-pitched screech that pierced through my skull. I dropped the journal, clutching my head as the sound rattled through my brain. It wasn't just a signal. It was something more. Something that had been waiting, broadcasting, pulling people in. I had to get out. I stumbled out of the bunker, the sound still ringing in my ears. The desert spun around me. I ran, my legs weak, my mind spinning. The landscape warped, the rocks and sand shifting as if the desert itself was alive, moving with the signal. When I finally made it back to the RV, I collapsed inside, my head pounding. The beeping was now a constant, dull hum in the back of my mind. I left the desert the next morning, driving as fast as I could. The beeping was still faint, but persistent. I didn't look back. Even now, days later, back in the city, I can still hear it. A faint, rhythmic pulse in the back of my mind. Always there, always calling me back. The signal isn't done with me yet. I thought this trip would fix everything. I thought that a week out in the woods, just me and Tyler, would somehow repair the damage from the past year. The divorce hit him harder than it hit me, and that's saying something. I thought maybe out here in the quiet, away from the distractions of phones and the city, we could connect again. You know, like fathers and sons are supposed to. But from the moment we hit the road, I knew it wasn't going to be easy. Tyler barely looked up from his phone the entire drive, earbuds in, scrolling mindlessly. He didn't care about the scenery, didn't care that we were headed to Deadwood Creek, a place I used to go with my own dad when I was his age. It's funny how history repeats itself. My father and I never really saw eye to eye either. He'd brought me out here hoping to teach me how to be a man, how to survive in the wilderness. And now, here I was, doing the same with Tyler, hoping the Black Hills would heal something in both of us. I glanced at him as we pulled into the campground. He didn't even notice the tall, dark pines surrounding us, swaying lightly in the wind. A dense fog had settled over the creek, and the sound of water trickling nearby was the only noise besides the RV's engine. It felt different than I remembered, more isolated, lonelier. "This is it," I said, more to myself than to Tyler. "Cool," he mumbled, still scrolling, not even looking up. I sighed, cutting the engine. After we set up camp, I suggested a short hike to check out the creek. Tyler grumbled but followed me. The trail was just as I remembered, narrow, winding through the trees with the creek gurgling beside us. There was something peaceful about it, but also something off. The further we went, the heavier the air felt, like the forest was watching us. We reached the creek's edge, where the water ran fast over the rocks. I crouched down, letting the cool water run over my hand. "This place used to be full of miners back in the gold rush days," I said, trying to make conversation. "A lot of people came out here looking to strike it rich. Some of them didn't make it out." Tyler shrugged. "I guess," he said. I stood up and brushed off my hands, frustrated. "You know, you could try enjoying this." He looked up from his phone for the first time and scowled. "I didn't ask to come here." I bit my tongue, holding back the argument that wanted to burst out. "Let's head back to camp." As we turned to leave, something flickered in my peripheral vision. I stopped, squinting through the trees. There, just at the edge of the clearing, a dim light floated in the distance. It flickered like a lantern, swaying in the wind. "Did you see that?" I asked, pointing toward the trees. Tyler glanced up, following my gaze. "What? That light?" It was gone. I blinked, rubbing my eyes. Maybe I'd imagined it. The fog had thickened while we were by the creek, and the woods were growing darker. "Never mind, let's go." The first night was when things started getting weird. Tyler and I had retreated to the RV after dinner. He was predictably glued to his phone while I tried to read a book, but the quiet gnawed at me. The stillness outside felt oppressive rather than peaceful. The wind had picked up, and the pines swayed ominously against the backdrop of the night. Then I heard it. At first I thought it was just the wind, a soft, barely there sound like whispers carried on the breeze. But as I listened, it grew more distinct. Not the wind, voices. Faint, disembodied voices murmuring just outside the RV. "Did you hear that?" I asked, sitting up straighter. "What?" Tyler didn't even look up. "The voices outside." Tyler pulled out one of his earbuds, frowning. "What are you talking about?" I stood up and went to the window, peering out into the darkness. Nothing but fog and trees. But I could still hear the whispers, just at the edge of hearing, like they were coming from the creek. I shook my head. Probably just the wind. Tyler rolled his eyes and went back to his phone, but something about those whispers unsettled me. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. The next morning, the air felt even heavier. Tyler was still distant, sulking around camp, so I suggested another hike, hoping it would clear the tension between us. He reluctantly agreed, and we set off down the trail again, heading back toward the creek. But this time, the unease I'd felt the day before was stronger. Every rustle in the trees, every crack of a branch set me on edge. As we walked, I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder. The feeling of being watched was constant now, like eyes were following us from the shadows. Then I saw it again, the light. This time it was brighter, flickering between the trees ahead of us, moving slowly, like a lantern being carried by an unseen hand. "There it is," I whispered, grabbing Tyler's arm. "Do you see it?" He stopped, frowning. What are you talking about?" The light flickered in and out, growing dimmer before vanishing completely. I took a step forward, but Tyler grabbed my arm. "Dad, let's just go back." I wanted to argue, but the look on his face, the fear in his eyes, stopped me. Truth be told, I was scared too. "Yeah, let's go." That night, the footsteps started. It was late, maybe past midnight, and I'd just managed to drift off when I heard them. Slow, deliberate steps, crunching on the gravel outside the RV. At first, I thought it was just an animal, maybe a deer or something, but the steps were too heavy, too purposeful. I lay there, holding my breath, listening as the footsteps circled the RV. They stopped by the window, then moved to the door. Tyler stirred in his sleep but didn't wake. I slipped out of bed and grabbed the flashlight. My heart pounded in my chest as I crept toward the window, slowly pulling back the curtain. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness, and there, just at the edge of the light, stood a figure. It was tall, dressed in ragged, old-fashioned clothes, like something out of the gold rush era. A wide-brimmed hat covered most of its face, but I could see the gleam of a lantern hanging from its hand. The figure stood perfectly still, just watching the RV. I stumbled back, heart racing. I didn't know what to do. My mind raced, searching for a rational explanation, but I couldn't find one. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure turned and vanished into the fog, the light of its lantern disappearing with it. The next day, Tyler was pale and jittery, his usual teenage indifference replaced with genuine fear. He hadn't seen the figure, but he'd heard the footsteps, and the look in his eyes told me he knew something was wrong. "We need to leave," he said, his voice trembling. "I know," I replied. "I'll start the RV. We'll head out." But when I turned the key in the ignition, nothing happened. The engine sputtered, then went silent. I tried again and again, but the RV wouldn't start. "We're stuck here," I muttered, feeling the weight of dread settle over me. That night, the footsteps returned. This time, they were louder, more insistent. The figure was back, pacing around the RV, dragging something behind it. I could hear the heavy scrape of metal on gravel, like chains being dragged along the ground. "Dad, what is that?" Tyler whispered, his face pale with fear. I didn't have an answer. I grabbed the flashlight and stepped toward the door. "Stay inside," I told him. "No, don't go out there," he begged, grabbing my arm. But I couldn't just sit there, listening to the thing outside. I had to confront it. I opened the door and stepped out into the cold night. The figure was there, standing by the creek, its lantern casting an eerie glow over the water. It didn't move as I approached, just watched me with shadowed eyes. "What do you want?" I shouted, though my voice trembled. "What are you?" The figure didn't respond. Instead, it slowly lifted its arm, pointing to the ground near the water's edge. There, half buried in the mud, was an old, rusted gold pan. I didn't understand at first, but then it hit me. The legend, the miner's ghost protecting his lost fortune. I knelt down, my hands trembling, and lifted the pan from the mud. As soon as I touched it, the figure vanished. The footsteps stopped. The whispers and the wind fell silent. The air was lighter. The oppressive weight lifted. I stood there for a long time, holding the gold pan, my mind racing. Then, without looking back, I turned and went back to the RV. The next morning, the RV started without a hitch. We left Deadwood Creek behind, and neither of us spoke about what happened. But as we drove away, I couldn't help but glance in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the figure watching us from the trees. I didn't, but I knew deep down that something had happened out there. Something I couldn't explain. Something I would never forget. And maybe, just maybe, Tyler and I would be okay. The road wound through the dense trees, snaking deeper into the heart of the low national forest. The thick canopy above allowed only sparse sunlight to filter through, casting shadows across the narrow dirt road. I gripped the steering wheel of my RV, trying to shake off the gnawing sense of unease creeping up my spine. It had been 3 hours since I'd passed another vehicle. Solitude was the whole point, wasn't it? This trip was supposed to help me clear my head, to reconnect with myself after the divorce. I had spent the last few months in a fog, and this trip to Deadwood Creek was meant to be my escape, a test of independence. No ex-husband, no stress, just me in the wilderness. I needed this. At least, that's what I'd been telling myself for the past 2 weeks. Deadwood Creek Campground wasn't listed on any mainstream maps, just a blip on an obscure site for hardcore campers who sought isolation. The campground had a reputation, but that was part of the appeal. I needed remote quiet, far away from anything that reminded me of what I'd left behind. But as I pulled into the clearing, past the sign half buried in moss that read Deadwood Creek, a shiver ran through me. The place was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that makes you second-guess your decision to be alone. I parked the RV near a small trickling creek. The only other vehicle was an old beat-up camper a short distance away, nestled under the towering pines. It was empty, no sign of movement, no campfire. Good. I wasn't in the mood for socializing. I stepped out into the cool afternoon air and surveyed the site. The woods were thick, ancient. The ground was littered with pine needles, muffling the sound of my footsteps. A perfect retreat. I set up camp, unfolding my chair and setting my mug of tea beside me as I sat by the creek, listening to the soft gurgle of the water. It was peaceful, just as I'd hoped, but after a while the peace felt off. Too still. The air grew heavy, pressing down on me, and the silence wasn't comforting anymore. It was oppressive. My mind wandered back to the stories I'd read online, the rumors about Deadwood Creek's dark history. This used to be a mining settlement during the gold rush, or so the tale went. Dozens of men had come to find their fortunes, but most found only death. Mysterious disappearances, bodies never recovered. Some say the men still haunt the place, bound to the land, working their endless shifts beneath the earth. I dismissed it at first, chalking it up to local folklore meant to spook tourists. But now, sitting alone in the fading light, the stories didn't seem so far-fetched. The wind rustled the trees, and I jumped at the sound. Get it together, Hannah, I thought, rolling my eyes at my own nerves. I hadn't come all this way just to scare myself into leaving. That's when I saw him, a man standing near the edge of the campground, just at the tree line, leaning against a tree. He was tall, with broad shoulders and a scruffy beard, his clothes worn and dirty as if he'd been out here for weeks. His gaze was fixed on me. I waved awkwardly, and he lifted a hand in response before slowly walking over. "Didn't mean to spook you," he said, his voice easy, almost too casual. "Didn't expect anyone else out here this late in the season." "I wasn't expecting anyone either," I replied, forcing a smile. "Just needed some time alone, you know." "Yeah, I get that," he chuckled, though the sound didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'm Rick, by the way. Been coming here for years." "Been coming here for years?" I nodded, unsure what to say. Rick had the look of someone who belonged out here, who knew the woods like the back of his hand. I didn't. "Be careful out here," Rick said after a pause, his gaze drifting toward the woods. "Deadwood Creek's got a history. Strange things happen when the sun goes down." My skin prickled at his words, but I forced myself to laugh. "Let me guess? Ghost stories? Miners and all that?" Rick's expression didn't change. "Something like that. Just don't stray too far from your camp." He turned and walked back to his camper without another word, leaving me with a knot of unease in my stomach. That night, I couldn't sleep. The RV was quiet, the temperature inside dropping faster than I expected. I wrapped myself in blankets and tried to ignore the feeling that something was wrong. Then the sound started. At first, I thought it was the wind, but soon I realized it was more than that. Faint at first, barely perceptible. A rhythmic clinking echoed from the direction of the creek. It sounded like tools, mining tools, pickaxes striking rock. I bolted upright in bed, my heart pounding. No, I was just imagining it. This was what I came here for, solitude. But I couldn't shake the sound. It was getting louder, the metallic rhythm persistent, almost like a heartbeat. I grabbed a flashlight and climbed out of the RV, my breath visible in the cold night air. The forest was a wall of darkness, the trees looming overhead like silent sentinels. The sound of the creek was louder now, rushing over rocks, and I could swear I heard voices, whispers carried on the wind. My flashlight beam swept across the campsite, catching nothing but trees and the faint shimmer of water. But then I saw them. Figures, shadowy, half-formed shapes moving by the creek, their outlines faint but unmistakably human. They moved like they were working, digging, swinging pickaxes in time with the clinking sound. My throat tightened as I realized they weren't there in the normal sense. They were translucent, faded. I stumbled back, my mind scrambling to make sense of it. Ghosts? No, that was impossible. I backed toward the RV, my pulse racing, but as I turned, I nearly collided with Rick. "Easy," he said, raising his hands. "I saw your light. Thought I'd come check on you." I couldn't find the words to explain what I'd just seen, but Rick didn't need me to. He just looked over at the creek and nodded, his face unreadable. "They come out at night. The miners. Been here for over a century, trapped in their own hell." I swallowed hard, trying to suppress the rising panic. "You mean you know about this? What is this place?" Rick gave a half smile, though it was more sad than comforting. "Deadwood Creek. These men came here to find gold, but all they found was death. Now they're stuck here, working the land forever. Some nights they're just echoes. Other nights..." He trailed off, but the implication was clear. On other nights they weren't just echoes. I've always liked the quiet of the road. No one asking questions, no one poking into your business, just miles of highway, the hum of the engine, and the occasional crackle of a distant voice on the CB. But that night, somewhere on Route 50 in the middle of Nevada, the silence felt different. Too quiet, too heavy. It had been days since I'd had a decent break. I'd left San Francisco with a load of building materials bound for Kansas City, figuring Route 50 would cut the travel time. They call it the loneliest road in America, and I've driven it enough times to know why. For hours at a time, you don't see a soul, just endless desert dotted with mountains that never seem to get any closer. I was more tired than I wanted to admit, the kind of tired that sneaks up on you, where your eyelids grow heavy and the lines on the road start to blur. Normally, I'd push through, but something told me to pull over this time. I glanced at the clock and decided to hit the next rest stop I saw. A quick nap, I told myself, and I'd be good as new. I felt a wave of relief when I spotted the weathered sign for a rest stop 2 miles ahead. The stop wasn't marked on my map, which was odd, but these old highways have plenty of places that don't show up anymore. The place looked like it hadn't seen a decent coat of paint in a decade. The lights above the parking area flickered weakly, casting long shadows across the cracked asphalt. A beat-up picnic table and a few rusted trash bins were all that marked the stop. The restroom building sat off to the side, its windows dark, and the air around it felt heavy, like it hadn't been disturbed in years. I pulled the rig into the lot and killed the engine. Silence settled in around me, pressing through the windows. I leaned back in the driver's seat, rubbing my face. I just needed a few hours of sleep, and I'd be good to go. But before I could settle in, nature called. Typical. With a sigh, I grabbed my flashlight and climbed out of the cab. The night air was cold, much colder than I'd expected for Nevada, and the wind carried a strange scent. Dry, with an underlying hint of something rotten. I wrinkled my nose but kept moving toward the restroom. The building was worse up close. Graffiti covered the exterior, but it wasn't the usual stuff. No names or crude drawings. These were symbols, spirals, triangles, strange geometric shapes I couldn't quite place. Some of them were carved deep into the wood, like they'd been there a long time. I pushed the door open, and the smell hit me harder inside, stronger than before. I flicked the light on, but the bulb overhead just buzzed and flickered weakly. I turned on my flashlight and swept it across the room. The place was empty, as I expected, but the walls were covered in more of those symbols, dozens of them, carved into the tiles, drawn on the mirrors. I did my business quickly, trying to ignore the feeling that those symbols were watching me, and made my way back out to the parking lot. That's when I saw the first figure. It was standing just beyond the reach of the flickering lights, a man in a heavy coat, his back to me, staring out into the desert. For a second, I considered calling out to him, but something about the way he stood there, so still, so quiet, made my gut twist. I stopped in my tracks, trying to decide if I should just get back in the truck and go, but the man didn't move. He didn't even seem to notice I was there. Maybe he was just another trucker, but I hadn't seen another rig on the road in hours. I took a step back toward my truck, keeping an eye on the figure. When I reached for the door handle, my fingers brushed something cold. Too cold. I pulled my hand back, confused, and shone the flashlight on the handle. Symbols. Those same spirals and triangles scratched into the metal of my door. My heart started racing. I hadn't seen them there before. I would have noticed. I swallowed hard, scanning the lot, but the figure was gone, just vanished. I fumbled with the door, pulling it open and climbing back into the cab as fast as I could. I locked the doors and sat there, trying to steady my breathing, trying to shake off the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I'd driven across the country dozens of times, stopped in every kind of rundown, creepy rest stop imaginable, but nothing like this. The radio crackled to life suddenly, nearly making me jump out of my skin. For a second I thought it was just picking up static, but then a voice broke through, low, distorted. Frank. My heart skipped a beat. I snatched the CB mic. Who is this? Silence. I stared at the radio, waiting, but the voice didn't come back. I tried to convince myself I'd imagined it, that my mind was playing tricks on me, but the sound of my name, it was too clear. I glanced out the window again, half expecting to see the man in the coat, but the lot was empty. The only movement was the weak flicker of the overhead lights. Still that rotten smell lingered, hanging in the air like a warning. I was about to start the engine and get the hell out of there when I noticed something in the rearview mirror. There was another figure now, standing near the restrooms. This one was closer. I couldn't make out their face in the dim light, but they were staring right at me, not moving, not blinking, just watching. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to leave, but when I reached for the ignition, the engine sputtered and died before it could even turn over. I tried again. Nothing. The lights on the dashboard flickered weakly before going out altogether. Come on, I muttered, trying to stay calm. Don't do this to me now. I grabbed my phone to call for help, but there was no signal, no bars, nothing. The figure was still there, closer now. Another figure appeared near the picnic table, and then another by the trash bins. They didn't approach, but they were closing in, little by little. My mouth was dry. I fumbled for the flashlight and shone it toward the restroom, hoping to get a better look at the figures. The beam of light cut through the dark, but when it hit the first figure, they were gone. Just gone. I swept the light across the lot, but all the figures had disappeared. Every single one. I didn't waste any more time. If my truck wasn't going to start, I'd fix it in the morning. For now, I just needed to get out of here on foot if I had to. I grabbed the toolbox from under the seat just in case and jumped down from the cab. That's when I noticed something else on the side of my truck. Etched into the paint was one of those symbols. Fresh. I could smell the metallic tang of scratched metal. It was the same spirals and triangles I'd seen in the bathroom, the same ones that had been on the door handle. The smell hit me again, stronger now. I turned, shining the flashlight toward the restroom, and that's when I saw it. The symbols were glowing. A faint, sickly light pulsed from the walls of the building. The carvings and scratches now alive with some kind of energy. The ground beneath my feet vibrated, a low hum building in my chest. I stumbled back toward the truck, my flashlight shaking in my grip, but the lights in the building grew brighter, casting long flickering shadows across the lot. And then I heard the voice again. Frank. I whipped around, scanning the empty lot, but there was no one there, no figures, no man in the coat. Just the voice coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. Frank, you need to stay. I felt a cold sweat break out across my forehead. My pulse pounded in my ears, but I kept moving, trying to get back into the cab. But the symbols, they were on my truck now, glowing with the same eerie light. The handle felt like ice under my fingers. The wind picked up, howling across the lot, carrying whispers with it, low, urgent voices layered on top of each other, impossible to understand, but they felt old, ancient. I was frozen in place, trapped between the truck and whatever the hell was happening in that restroom. The lights, the symbols, the voices. I didn't know what to make of any of it, but I knew one thing. I had to leave now. The truck groaned as I climbed back into the cab, and I turned the key one last time, praying it would start. The engine sputtered, coughed, and finally roared to life. Without another thought, I slammed the truck into gear and floored it out of the lot, the tires skidding on the cracked asphalt. The rest stop disappeared in the rearview mirror, the glowing lights and symbols fading into the distance. As I drove down the highway, my hands trembling on the wheel, I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't escaped. The silence of the road was back, but it wasn't the same. The weight of those symbols, the voice, it lingered, and I knew deep down that whatever was tied to that rest stop wasn't finished with me. I don't stop on Route 50 anymore, not after that night. Some places are better left in the past. I thought I knew isolation. I'd spent years driving across the country chasing celestial events, camping in places no one else dared to go. Black Rock Desert was supposed to be no different. I'd chosen this spot because it was one of the darkest places in the United States, far from the light pollution of cities, with nothing but the stars above and the cracked earth below. A perfect place to watch the meteor shower I'd been anticipating for months. But the desert has a way of getting under your skin. I arrived in the late afternoon, the sun blazing high, its rays bouncing off the endless white of the salt flats. The ground stretched out in every direction, flat and featureless, interrupted only by distant mountains rising like ghosts on the horizon. It was beautiful in a desolate way, the kind of place that makes you feel small and insignificant. Exactly what I needed. The RV's engine rumbled to a stop, kicking up dust as I parked. I opened the door, stepping into the dry, hot air. The silence was immediate. No wind, no rustling leaves, distant hum of civilization, just a profound, almost oppressive stillness. I told myself it was peaceful, that this was what I wanted. A few days alone in the desert to focus on my photography and watch the night sky. But as I looked out over the vast expanse of cracked earth, a strange feeling settled in my chest, like a weight pressing down. I brushed it off. It had been a long drive, and the heat was getting to me. I'd feel better once the sun went down. I spent the first few hours setting up camp, adjusting my telescope and testing my camera equipment. The sky was still a blazing blue, but the desert's unforgiving heat was beginning to fade, replaced by a sharp chill as the sun sank lower. By the time dusk arrived, the temperature had plummeted, and I retreated into the RV to grab a jacket before stepping back outside. That's when the radio first crackled to life. I'd brought my old ham radio along, hoping to catch some weather updates or maybe listen in on local astronomy broadcasts. I hadn't expected much out here, but the static-filled hum surprised me. I turned the dial, searching for a signal, and for a moment I thought I'd found one, a faint voice cutting through the static. "Don't stay." I froze. The words were barely audible, like a whisper carried on the wind, but they were unmistakable. I leaned closer, adjusting the frequency, but the voice was gone, replaced by the familiar hiss of static. I turned the radio off, chalking it up to interference, old equipment, or weird atmosphere. Still, the unease in my chest was growing. The first night was incredible. The sky came alive with meteors streaking across the blackness, more stars than I'd ever seen in my life. I stood in awe, snapping pictures, adjusting my telescope, completely losing track of time. Out here, under the stars, the rest of the world felt far away. It was just me, the night, and the vastness of space. And yet, something nagged at me. When I reviewed the photos later, I noticed something strange in the background of one of my long exposure shots. There was a blur, a faint, almost imperceptible smudge. At first I thought it was a mistake. Dust on the lens, maybe, or a glitch in the camera's settings. But as I scrolled through the rest of the images, the blur appeared again and again in each photo. It seemed to be getting closer to the RV. I wiped the camera lens, took another shot, and stared hard at the screen. Nothing. It had to be some kind of artifact from the desert air, the heat mixing with the cold night, playing tricks on the lens. Still, the feeling in my chest tightened. I turned in early, trying to push the unease aside, telling myself I'd check the equipment in the morning. Day 2 was different. I woke to a stifling heat that even the RV's air conditioning couldn't seem to fight. I cursed, fiddling with the controls, but the air blowing through the vents was weak and warm. I grabbed a bottle of water and stepped outside, hoping the breeze would provide some relief, but the air was dead still as the grave. I spent most of the day trying to fix the RV's engine, which had been acting sluggish since I arrived. I knew I should be enjoying the desert, but the more time I spent out there, the more the silence started to gnaw at me. It wasn't the peaceful isolation I had expected. It felt watchful. As the day dragged on, the sun beat down, turning the ground beneath my feet into a furnace. The radio, which had been quiet since last night's strange transmission, crackled to life again. This time the voice was clearer. Danger. You need to leave. I dropped the wrench I was holding, staring at the radio in disbelief. The voice was faint, distorted, like it was coming from miles away, but it was unmistakable. Someone or something was speaking to me. I snatched up the radio, twisting the dial, trying to find the source. Static. Nothing but static. The voice was gone again, leaving me standing in the middle of the desert, sweat running down my back, my heart hammering in my chest. I should have left then. I should have packed up and driven out of there. But the RV's engine was still stalling, and part of me didn't want to admit that I was spooked. This was why I came out here, wasn't it? To face my fears, to be alone in the dark. I stayed. And that night, the shadows came. The meteor shower was more intense on the second night, the sky alive with fire and light. I sat by the RV, staring up at the heavens, the vastness of the universe overwhelming. But no matter how beautiful the stars were, my eyes kept drifting back to the edges of the desert, where the darkness seemed to pool, thick and impenetrable. It was there, at the far edge of my vision, that I first saw the figure, a shape standing just beyond the reach of my campfire's light. At first I thought it was a trick of the eye. The desert plays with your perception. Distances blur, shadows stretch. But when I blinked, the figure was still there, standing, watching. I grabbed my camera, adjusting the focus, snapping a shot before the figure disappeared. I wasn't sure what I was expecting, maybe an animal or even another camper who'd wandered too close. But when I checked the camera's screen, my blood went cold. The figure wasn't human. It was tall, too tall, with elongated limbs and a strange, distorted form. It was like a shadow brought to life, a smear of darkness against the starlit sky. The more I stared at it, the more unreal it looked. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I slowly lowered the camera. When I looked again, the figure was gone. The air was suddenly freezing, the kind of cold that bites at your skin. I retreated into the RV, locking the door behind me, my heart racing. I told myself I was imagining things. The desert played tricks on people. I'd read about it. People seeing things that weren't there, hearing voices carried on the wind. But that didn't explain the figure in the photo. The night dragged on and I stayed awake, listening for anything, any sound, any movement. But all I heard was the persistent hum of the radio and the static growing louder by the minute. The next day I knew I had to leave. Whatever was out there, it wasn't just my imagination. The figure, the voices, I couldn't explain it, and I didn't want to. I packed up as quickly as I could, but when I turned the key in the ignition, the RV sputtered and died. I tried again and again. Nothing. I stepped out into the desert, sweat pouring down my face. The heat was oppressive, and the silence pressed in on me, suffocating. I tried to call for help, but my phone had no signal, and the radio was useless, just a constant, garbled stream of static. Then the voice returned, louder than ever. "Stay. Come closer." It wasn't a whisper anymore, it was a command. And when I looked out across the desert, I saw the figure again. Closer this time, standing in the distance. Its form was hazy and indistinct, but unmistakable. It was waiting for me. My legs felt like lead as I backed toward the RV, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The air was freezing now, the warmth of the day gone, replaced by a bone-deep chill. I knew in that moment that if I stayed, I would become like the figure, a shadow, a ghost, trapped in this forsaken place, wandering the desert forever. I ran. I don't know how I got the RV started. Maybe it was adrenaline, or maybe sheer panic. But when the engine finally roared to life, I slammed the gas pedal to the floor and didn't look back. The figure, the voice, the cold. They all faded into the distance as I sped across the salt flats, the desert stretching endlessly behind me. I never looked at the photos again. I couldn't. Whatever was out there, it was better left unseen. I'll never return to Black Rock Desert. Some places were meant to be empty. I've always found comfort in the silence of the woods, out here away from people, away from the world. You can think straight. George Washington and Jefferson National Forest had been my sanctuary for years, my escape from the clutter of civilization. But this time something felt different. It was as if the land itself was holding a secret it didn't want to share. It had been a rough few months. Lisa left me, and I couldn't say I didn't see it coming. I'd been distant, losing myself in work, then losing the work altogether. I thought a few days alone, hunting and camping, would clear my head. I needed space, and the mountains were the only place I knew where I could truly breathe. The plan was simple. 3 days, 4 at the most. Head out to the edge of Silent Pines, an area where the deer roam freely and the mountains are still untouched by the tourist crowd. I'd bag a buck, maybe 2, and return with meat for the freezer. Just me, my gear, and the quiet hum of nature. But it didn't take long for that comfort and hum to go disturbingly quiet. The first day was uneventful, at least at first. I parked my truck at the trailhead, loaded up my pack, slung my rifle over my shoulder, and began the familiar hike into the heart of the forest. My boots crunched over the leaf-covered trail as I climbed higher, the dense trees closing in around me. The fresh mountain air was cool, the perfect kind of crisp that made you feel alive, but something was off. I noticed it halfway through the hike. The usual sounds of the forest, the birds, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush, were missing. There was only the sound of my own footsteps and the occasional creak of the trees swaying gently in the wind. I shook it off as nerves. It was always a little eerie out here in the deep woods, especially when you were alone. That was part of the appeal. I told myself it was just the tension I'd been feeling lately, everything weighing on my chest, turning normal things into problems. I set up camp in the clearing near the stream I remembered from previous trips. The sun was starting to dip behind the mountain ridge, casting long shadows over the landscape. The fire crackled warmly as I cooked up some canned stew, sipping from a tin cup of lukewarm coffee, trying to push away the gnawing feeling that something wasn't quite right. It wasn't until later that night, after the fire had burned low and I was stretched out in my sleeping bag, that I noticed the first real sign: footsteps. At first, I thought it was just an animal. I mean, what else could it be? Deer, maybe a raccoon. But it didn't sound like that. It sounded like someone walking, a soft, deliberate crunch in the leaves, moving slowly as if it was circling the camp. I lay still, holding my breath, listening intently. The steps grew closer, then stopped. I sat up slowly, reaching for the flashlight and rifle by my side. The firelight flickered dimly, casting long, jittery shadows around the clearing, but there was nothing there. I scanned the tree line, heart pounding harder than I'd like to admit. Nothing moved, just trees standing tall and silent, watching. Must have been the wind, I muttered, my voice shaky. I lay back down, my grip tight on the rifle. I'd always prided myself on being a tough, no-nonsense kind of guy, but something about those footsteps didn't sit right with me. It wasn't the sound itself, it was the feeling that came with it, like I was being watched. The next morning, things got worse. My water jug was gone. I thought I'd been careful about where I left it, but maybe I hadn't sealed it tight. Maybe an animal dragged it off during the night. I searched the area looking for signs of raccoons or coyotes, but all I found were footprints, human, barefoot and small, like a child's. But what child would be wandering around the woods, miles away from the nearest road, in the dead of night? I crouched down, running my fingers over the soft dirt where the prints had pressed into the earth. They seemed fresh, leading in a slow, meandering pattern around the campsite before disappearing into the woods. My skin crawled, a chill running down my spine as I stared at the tracks, my mind racing through every possible explanation. None of them made sense. By midday, I'd convinced myself it must have been some local kids playing a prank. Maybe I'd stumbled into someone's turf without realizing it. But as I hiked deeper into the woods, rifle ready, the sense of unease only grew stronger. Every step I took felt heavy, like the trees themselves were watching me, closing in tighter. Then I saw it. I was tracking a deer along the ridgeline when I noticed movement in the trees just ahead. At first I thought it was the buck I'd been hunting, but then it stepped out into the clearing, a figure, tall, hunched and gaunt. Its body was draped in shadow, but I could see the faint outline of its pale, too long limbs, twisted in ways a man shouldn't be. And those eyes, two glowing yellow eyes, staring right at me. I froze, rifle raised, heart hammering in my chest. For a moment we just stared at each other, the wind dead and still around us. The figure didn't move, didn't blink. It just stood there, watching me. "Who the hell are you?" I called out, my voice cracking in the silence. No answer. I swallowed hard, taking a step back. The figure disappeared into the trees as silently as it had appeared. My hands were shaking, the rifle's barrel wobbling as I lowered it, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I tried to tell myself it was just a shadow, a trick of the light, but I knew better. I'd seen it, and whatever it wasn't human. That night, the footsteps returned, louder this time, circling the camp with purpose. I stayed awake, rifle in hand, listening to the crunch of leaves as it moved closer. Every time I thought I'd hear it right outside my tent, the steps would stop, leaving only the suffocating silence. I couldn't sleep, couldn't even close my eyes without imagining those yellow eyes watching me from the darkness. By the third day, I was a mess, exhausted, jumpy, paranoid. I hadn't seen the figure again, but I could feel it following me, watching. The forest, once my refuge, had become a prison. I couldn't shake the feeling that no matter how fast I walked, no matter how deep I went, it was always just behind me, waiting. That afternoon, I found more footprints. This time, they were right outside my tent, circling it in strange, looping patterns. There were dozens of them, overlapping, almost chaotic, as if someone or something had danced around the camp all night. My heart raced as I traced the tracks, panic creeping into my bones. The final straw came that evening. I was sitting by the fire, trying to calm my nerves when I heard it again. The soft, whispering voice carried on the wind. It was faint, almost indistinguishable from the rustle of the trees, but I could make out one thing clearly. It was my name. Nate. I shot to my feet, spinning around, scanning the darkened woods for any sign of movement. The voice called again, softer this time, but closer. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my gear, stuffed it into my pack as fast as I could, heart pounding in my ears. I needed to leave now. Whatever was out there, whatever had been stalking me for days, wasn't just a trick of the mind. It was real, and it wasn't going to let me go easily. As I slung my pack over my shoulder and reached for my rifle, I felt it, a presence behind me. I turned slowly, my breath catching in my throat. There, standing at the edge of the firelight, was the figure, tall, twisted, with limbs too long and eyes glowing a sickly yellow. Its face was pale and gaunt, hollow eyes staring into me as if it could see straight through my skin and into my soul. I raised the rifle, but before I could pull the trigger, it vanished, just gone, like smoke dissolving into the night air. I ran. I didn't care about the trail, didn't care about my gear. I ran as fast as I could through the forest, branches slapping at my face, rocks and roots tripping me up as I sprinted blindly through the trees. I could hear it behind me, the soft crunch of footsteps following, never far behind. By the time I reached the trailhead, my lungs were burning. My legs felt like jelly, and my mind was racing with fear. I threw myself into the truck, slamming the door shut. The silence inside the cab was deafening. My hands shook as I fumbled for the keys, finally starting the engine and peeling out of there as fast as I could. Even now, weeks later, I can't get it out of my head. The figure, those eyes, the voice that called my name, luring me deeper into the woods. I haven't told anyone about it. No one would believe me anyway. Just another man who got lost in the forest, right? But I know what I saw. I know what was out there. I haven't been back to the mountain since, and every time I close my eyes, I still see it, watching, waiting. I was halfway up Blackwater Ridge when Glenn warned me about the lights. His bait shop was the last stop before the mountain trail turned into pure wilderness, and I dropped in for some extra firewood. He was standing behind the counter, leaning on his elbows, watching me load up my supplies. His words hung in the air long after they left his mouth. "People get lost up there," he said, his voice low and cautious. "You hear the stories?" I zipped up my jacket and shook my head. "What stories?" "About the lights. They show up when the sun goes down, start flickering in the trees like they're leading you somewhere. But you follow them, you don't come back." I should have known better than to brush him off. I should have asked more questions. But the truth was, I didn't care. I wasn't here for ghost stories or local superstitions. I was here to clear my head after everything that had happened with Ryan. The breakup, the endless nights of replaying every argument in my head. I needed this time away from the world. Just me and my RV parked in the middle of nowhere. Blackwater Ridge had seemed perfect. A remote place where no one could find me and, more importantly, where I wouldn't be tempted to find anyone. "I'll be fine," I told Glenn, trying to smile, but his eyes were serious, unblinking. "Just watch yourself," he said, handing me a small pouch as I paid for the wood. "Keep this with you. Some folks say it helps." "What is it?" "Just something my family's passed down," he said, avoiding my gaze. "Might keep the lights away." I didn't believe in that kind of thing, but I pocketed the pouch anyway, more out of politeness than anything else. Then I left the shop, got into my RV, and made my way up the winding mountain road toward Blackwater Ridge. The campsite was exactly what I'd hoped for, deserted, overgrown, and tucked away in a grove of tall pines. The air smelled crisp and clean, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. The old campground looked like it hadn't been touched in years. There were a few rusted RVs half hidden in the foliage, relics of past campers who had either left them behind or forgotten about them altogether. I parked my RV at the far edge of the grove, close enough to the trees to feel enclosed, but far enough from the abandoned vehicles to avoid any weird vibes. It was perfect, a place to disconnect and forget. That first day was peaceful. I went for a hike, snapped a few photos, and by the time the sun was setting, I was sitting outside by the fire pit, listening to the crackling flames and sipping from a thermos of tea. The sky was clear, and the stars began to poke through the darkness, dotting the sky like tiny pinpricks of light. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it, a small flickering light deep in the woods, just past the tree line. At first, I thought it was a firefly, but it was too big. It moved slowly, gliding through the trees like it was looking for something or someone. I sat up, narrowing my eyes to focus. The light was faint but unmistakable. It pulsed gently like a heartbeat, its glow barely reaching me through the dense pines. Then another light appeared beside it. Then another. 3 faint orbs flickering in unison, moving deeper into the forest. Glenn's warning about the lights echoed in my mind, but I shook it off. They were probably just campers in the distance, or maybe a reflection from a house far off the ridge. I wasn't about to let some old superstition spook me on my first night. I sat back, trying to relax, but the lights wouldn't leave me alone. They moved again, gliding slowly through the trees as if they were beckoning me to follow. I could almost hear a whisper in the air, like soft voices drifting on the wind. "Come closer." I stood abruptly, shaking my head. "No," I muttered to myself. "You're not doing this. You came here to get away, not chase after stupid lights in the woods." But the longer I stood there, the harder it was to ignore them. They were so gentle, so inviting. It felt like they were calling me, pulling at some part of me that I couldn't explain. My feet shifted forward, inching toward the forest edge. "Come." I blinked, snapping out of it. What was I doing? I wasn't about to follow some strange lights into the woods. Glenn had warned me, hadn't he? I couldn't let myself get sucked into this nonsense. I backed away from the trees, heart pounding, and went back into my RV, slamming the door behind me. The lights flickered one last time outside the window before they disappeared, swallowed by the darkness. The next day, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I spent the morning hiking, trying to focus on anything but what had happened the night before. But the woods felt different now, quieter. The usual sounds of birds and rustling leaves had faded, replaced by a stillness that pressed in on me. Every time I looked over my shoulder, I thought I saw movement. A shadow darting between the trees, or the faintest flicker of light just out of sight. I told myself it was paranoia, that I was letting Glenn's warning get under my skin. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. By the time evening came, the anxiety had settled into my bones. I lit another fire and sat outside, staring into the flames, trying to calm myself. But as soon as the sun dipped below the horizon, the lights came back. This time, they were closer. I watched, frozen, as they flickered between the trees, more of them now. 5, maybe 6, all moving in the same slow, rhythmic pattern. They circled the edge of the campground, their glow soft but persistent. I felt that same pull again, stronger this time, like invisible hands reaching out to me. "Come." The whispers were clearer now, louder. They filled my ears, my mind, drowning out everything else. It sounded like his voice, Ryan, his soft, pleading tone asking me to come closer, to follow. I stood, my body moving of its own accord. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was need. I needed to know what these lights were, where they were leading me. Maybe it was Ryan. Maybe he'd followed me, wanted to make things right. The thought was irrational, but in that moment, it made perfect sense. I took a step toward the forest, then another. My heart raced as I approached the tree line, the lights growing brighter, more vivid. But as I crossed into the shadows, something shifted in the air. The forest felt wrong, twisted, like the trees were closing in around me. The lights flickered erratically, their gentle glow turning sharp, jagged. I froze. The whispers turned darker, harsher. "Come now." No, this wasn't right. This wasn't Ryan. This was something else, something wrong. I stumbled back, panic rising in my chest. The lights surged forward, surrounding me, blinding me. In desperation, I grabbed the pouch Glenn had given me, clutching it tightly. The lights flickered wildly, then dimmed. I backed away as the whispers receded and the lights finally disappeared, leaving me alone in the dark woods, shaking.